Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I am Fazia Huda, the National Mental Health Program Coordinator for Do You Mind at Community-Based Research Center, or CBRC. I use she, her pronouns. And I would like to welcome you all to this session called Do You Mind Cycle 2 of Community-Led Responses to 2SLGBTQ+ Youth Mental Health, where I'm joined by 5 amazing panelists, including CBRC's Reporting and Evaluation Lead, Ricky Rodriguez. Next slide, please. Before we get started, I want to acknowledge that while this session is taking place virtually, we are on the land that belongs to and is stolen from First Nation people of Turtle Island. For myself, I'm situated on Amiswachi Waskaikan in Treaty 6 territory, a traditional meeting ground and home of many Indigenous people and nations. We cannot engage in the work of addressing the health of 2SLGBTQIA+ people without considering the historic and ongoing impacts of colonization on Indigenous peoples in Canada, including countless lives lost, as well as racist systems and institutions that continue to marginalize Indigenous people. We also acknowledge the historical oppression of Black people and people of color. The history of white supremacy in Canada, North America, and globally has resulted in long-lasting damage. We need to name the harm while also engaging in an ongoing process of decolonization. Here at CBRC, we strive to conduct our research in an anti-oppressive way, working towards equity and inclusion for all two-spirit, queer, trans, and non-binary people. Next slide, please. Now a little bit about the agenda for today's session. We are here together for about an hour and 30 minutes, with the last bit left to engage in Q&A period with all our attendees today. The objective for today's session is that folks can hopefully learn a little bit more about the Do You Mind program, and we, the panelists, would love to share some of our experience and insights. So all the folks attending today can hopefully apply some of those into the context of their leadership programs and services. We will begin the session with a high-level overview of the program and its structure, along with a quick recap of last year's highlights and some of the adaptations that we made this year for program delivery. Then Ricky will join us to share some evaluation highlights, following which we will have our panel discussion where our wonderful delivery partners will share their experiences about running the program this year. Then I will cover some overall program insights, which I hope can be helpful for those who might be interested in delivering a leadership program like Do You Mind or Do You Mind itself. And then at the end, we'll have a question and answer period, as I mentioned, where we can hear from you. So please feel free to share some of the questions in the chat box, and we will monitor the chat throughout the session. So if any time during the presentation you have any questions, just share them, and then we will come back to those and communicate those to our panelists at the end during the Q&A period. Also, just a housekeeping note, there is no need for folks to record this session, as CBRC is recording the session for us, and we will be publishing this presentation on our website very soon in the future. Lastly, and importantly, at the end of the session, you're welcome to share your feedback using our evaluation survey, which will both be shared in the chat as well as in a follow-up email. Next slide, please. Now, before we get too far discussing the program, I wanted to introduce briefly about CBRC, which is a community-based organization that promotes the health of people of diverse sexualities and genders through research and intervention development. For those of you who are new to our work, you can go to our website at cbrc.net and learn about some of the different projects we are currently implementing across our core pillars of work, which include community-led research, knowledge exchange, network building, and leadership development. And Do You Mind is one of CBRC's asset-based leadership programming for the broader 2SLGBTQ+ youth aged 18 to 29 years old. This project is funded by Mental Health Promotion Innovation Fund, for short MHPIF, under Public Health Agency of Canada. This fund supports the development and delivery of community-based youth mental health programming, and it aims to address health equity, to build protective factors, reduce risk factors, and address the underlying determinants of health. Now for a Do You Mind program structure, we wanted to make sure that it aligns with the programming that CBRC does. So what we did was we looked at all of CBRC's existing health leadership programs, and we already had a network of national partners that we really wanted to leverage for the delivery of Do You Mind program. For the delivery format of Do You Mind, we looked at this existing leadership programs, which had four core objectives. And we like to say that our programs have BITE. So, which I'll explain it, the BITE acronym, and I think it's really an interesting acronym to have. So these programs essentially help build connections between participants, and they improve health literacy. And for Do You Mind, the health literacy component was focused more on mental health literacy curriculum. Through this program, participants also get training where they're able to build their practical skills so they can focus more on a community-based health promotion. And finally, a practical component where participants can apply their learned skills in creating a pilot intervention in their community that addresses a particular issue or challenge that they face in the community. Next slide, please. Again, I will do a quick recap of last year's programming, since this is our second year of delivering Do You Mind. So as discussed, the Do You Mind format ensured that participants were able to have repeated engagement throughout the program, where they would build their social connections both during the programming and also can maintain some of those social connections as the programming ended. They also completed a mental health literacy curriculum, which again had a lot of guest facilitators and community experts come and help deliver that curriculum. And this curriculum was also created in consultation with both our delivery partners as well as community members. Following the completion of the curriculum, participants received skills building training where they connected with community leaders and experts to understand more about community health promotion, what it takes to have a successful community health programming, and just essentially get that one-on-one or as a group, learn from the experts that is already present in our communities. And then the last bit of the programming was where they were able to apply their learned and already existing skills to create their own pilot intervention within their community. And this is where we really ensured the asset-based approach of the programming came through, because we wanted to make sure that participants felt that they were really equipped and they already brought so many of their skills when they were planning their pilot interventions. Now, along with our funders, we created a program infographic for Do You Mind, which is available on our website. And I see somebody has already posted that in the chat. And this infographic highlights the program objectives and the approaches that we have implemented, and also lists our partner sites from last year. So last year we had partner sites across Edmonton, Vancouver, and Halifax. Now, with last year's program delivery, three unique interventions was found across each of the sites, and all of those interventions included an intergenerational mentorship program, an online mental health resource guide, and finally, a creative zine writing workshop. So details about these interventions can be found in our last year's webinar, which is also available on cbrc.net. And I think if somebody can post the link in the chat box, that would be great. And during last year's webinar, we actually went in detail. We shared more details about each of these interventions, what were some of its objectives, and what are some of the outcomes. So I encourage folks to check it out, because we had some really interesting interventions last year as well. Last but not the least, we also created an evaluation highlight from cycle 1, where we analyzed all the survey data that we received from all our program participants and our partner sites. And we really wanted to share the impact of this programming, the learnings of this programming through that highlights document with our broader community members. So again, please feel free to check that out. Next slide, please. Now, for cycle 2 adaptations, we wanted to be really intentional about the learnings and the experiences we gained from cycle 1 and really execute that well to ensure that cycle 2 runs even more smoothly and successfully. And again, the pandemic was still ongoing and we did have some surges of new variants while we were delivering the program. But overall, I wanted to highlight some of the key adaptations that we made for cycle 2. So first and foremost, following last year's knowledge exchange webinar similar to this one, there was a lot of interest among other service providers in terms of delivering Do You Mind? So after a bit of conversation, Max Ottawa, who are located in Ottawa, was really interested in delivering this Do You Mind program, and they had experience in other in similar leadership programs in the past as well. So essentially, Max Ottawa joined Do You Mind as their 4th partner, and we had a discussion with our funders and everything went smoothly. So we were able to scale up for Do You Mind in this cycle 2. Also, following all the evaluation data and the recommendations from last cycle, we learned that we needed to make some adjustment to our mental health curriculum. And we really wanted to make sure that this curriculum for cycle 2 resonates with the participants, the partners, and really focuses on the nuanced topics that is relevant to queer folks and their mental health. So for the new mental health curriculum, we had 12 unique mental health literacy modules for partners to choose from. And each of those modules really captured different topics that is relevant. For example, we had the basics of what is mental health, what does mental health look like for queer folks, and what are the systemic institutions that are placed, and what are the social determinants, the psychosocial barriers that all have a compounding effect. Following that, we also had 3 mental health promotion modules that really provided participants with the knowledge and how to go about creating a community health promotion project. And during all those modules, the key thing that we wanted to ensure that we wanted to engage more community experts, more local community leaders and guest presenters, so that participants have the opportunity to engage with them, to learn from them, and as well as expand their networking by connecting with those leaders. And also we made sure, because we knew this delivery will also going to be online, unfortunately, because of the ongoing pandemic. So we wanted to make sure all of our materials was adaptable for both in-person and online delivery. And we had additional materials such as questions for participants to engage more in conversations during the sessions, as well as some resource materials that CBRC and the partners created together. So we made sure that all of those things were available for our partners so that they can utilize those during the delivery of the program. Now, the other key thing we made sure for cycle 2 was that we wanted to have more opportunities to involve the past program participants so that they can bring their experience and what made last year successful into this year as well. So different opportunities for past program participants. For example, I know in Edmonton, one of last year's program participants actually acted as a community trainee. So they really helped deliver the program with a new set of participants this year. And also we made sure that we had more flexibility for our partners around the timeline. So there were 2 options. They could either deliver the program starting from summer till spring of this year, or they could have a condensed program delivery. So really, we wanted to make sure partners have the option to utilize what works best for them. Then we translated all of our existing program materials into French so that Do You Mind program is ready to be delivered in both English language and in French language. We are waiting on some of our French translation to be completed, and by the end of this month, we will have a fully realized French version of this program as well. Last but not the least, we also ensured some evaluation strategy updates, and Ricky Rodriguez, who's our reporting and evaluation lead at CBRC, will share more about those updated evaluation strategies. So please join me in welcoming Ricky. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Fauzia. So in terms of some of the adaptations we made when it came to evaluation, our core evaluation domains, which are based on the goals of the Mental Health Promotion Innovation Fund, as well as CBRC's own community intervention goals, those domains stayed the same. And these include focusing on increased knowledge and skills, positive changes in behavior, changes in protective factors, and improved well-being among those core participants of the Do You Mind program. For our evaluation strategy, we originally did surveys at 4 different time points with those core Do You Mind program participants. But in cycle 1, we learned that this had a high burden of participation. So we removed one of those surveys, the post-intervention survey, moving any key questions from that survey to our post-programming survey and our follow-up survey. And in surveys, we also removed some questions to make those surveys more concise and manageable, focusing only on the most important indicators. Most of the other elements of our evaluation strategy remain the same, including, next slide, please. All right, so now with the ongoing pandemic and online delivery, the response rates were similar to those of the first cycle, but the results produced have continued to be useful for evaluating the achievement of our goals. So we noticed that in terms of increased knowledge and skills, 70.6% of respondents reported increased knowledge of the topics covered throughout the Do You Mind curriculum. 76.5% also reported increased skills for responding to issues affecting the mental health of their communities. In terms of positive changes to behavior, 63.6% of respondents reported at follow-up that they had adopted at least one positive health behavior or harm reduction strategy, or had accessed at least one health or wellness service or support for the first time or more frequently. In terms of changes to protective factors, 64.7% of respondents reported improved social and emotional skills. 70.6% reported that they developed new social connections with other program participants. And 58.8% reported increased satisfaction with their connection to the 2SLGBTQ+ community. And finally, in terms of improved well-being, 64.7% reported that participating in the program increased their overall sense of well-being. And I'll hand it back over to Fausia to introduce our partners.
Next slide, please. Thank you, Ricky, for sharing all the evaluation data. And now it's my pleasure to introduce all of our 4 partners for this cycle. We do have YouthCo, who is situated in Vancouver, BC. Then we have Youth Project, who are in Halifax, Nova Scotia. And then we have Emhc, who are in Edmonton, Alberta. And last but not least, we have Max Ottawa, who are in Ottawa. So for now, next slide, please. I will introduce YouthCo, and YouthCo is an organization of young leaders with the mission to reduce the impact of HIV and Hep C stigma on youth in British Columbia. The organization's staff, volunteers, and board members are all youth. And shared leadership, peer education, and support, harm reduction, and community engagement are the 4 main approaches to all of YouthCo's work. Joining us today from YouthCo, we have their Mycelium program manager, Emily Bailey, who uses they, she pronouns. Outside of work, Emily can be found either lost in Pacific Spirit Park or being overly competitive playing Dutch Blitz, which is also one of my favorite games. We also have Eol, who uses they, them pronouns and is the Mycelium program coordinator and was this year's lead coordinator for Do You Mind at YouthCo. Outside of work, Yule can be found immersed in deep thought while commuting, painting, and caring for their nails, as well as spending hours talking with their loved ones. So please join me in welcoming both Emily and Eol, who will be sharing more about their experience in delivering Do You Mind this year.
Thank you, Fazia, for that introduction, and hello, everyone. It's lovely to be here with you today. I'm calling in from the unceded, stolen, and occupied territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. And I just wanted to start by kind of grounding in, again, in the sort of human level and community level impacts of this work, and some of the areas that we chose to focus on at YouthCo this past year while delivering the Do You Mind project. So we know as queer and trans youth that we are inheriting a powerful ancestry that is both born of beauty and dissonance and resistance. We also know that as queer and trans youth that we're inheriting a disproportionate experience with harmful mental health outcomes. We know that the way that the world responds to us as queer and trans youth can result in our rights being stripped away from us, as well as our basic needs. We also know that through the work of colonization, that we have been led into relationships with mental health care providers, systems, and other healthcare providers that is complicated. Where we are inheriting the harms of practices of conversion therapy, as well as many other interventions in our mental health. And also naming mental health as a descriptor of our experiences as queer and trans people and youth. And that we also know as an HIV organization and youth leading the HIV movement, that stigma is also one of those ways that our mental health can be weaponized against us as ways of validating the harms that come into our lives through the stigma of HIV for those of us that are HIV positive. Next slide. Thank you. So as we sort of ground ourselves in that larger context of our work, this year at YouthCo, we decided to bring about the same elements of the work that we practiced last year of offering a retreat for the leadership development component of the work and an online weekly collaborative process following the retreat for the pilot intervention. But this year, due to like pandemic shifts and changes, we were more set up to be able to offer a retreat experience that was a little bit more glamorous, that was more of a place where we were able to share and gather with one another while also enjoying a very beautiful part of the world. So this year we recruited 10 youth from across the lower mainland of BC, and we held a 4-day retreat on Quadra Island on Tukwalutun territory. During the retreat, we shared the Do You Mind curriculum and had particular relationship building activities each evening as moments of engaging outside of the heavier conversations that we might have been having during the day. And then following the retreat in October to November, we held weekly meetings where the cohort designed and developed an art installation that they plan to share as an exhibit. And as we have been managing throughout these pandemic times, some of our hopes and dreams for how that would look was challenged in this earlier part of the year where restrictions increased. And so we had to transition that from being a public art exhibit into an online event that was still able to be an interactive art experience where youth were able to still get to share the art installation in an online forum. And this year, part of that pilot project, what came out as major themes in the work when we are gathering together on Quadra Island was this particular phrase of what from our queer and trans identities nourish us. And I see there that there's also the link to this art installation available for folks to take a closer look to. And so similarly, I think that what came across in our work this year was a real recognition that as we go through and we talk about the unique elements of the intersections of our queer and trans identities as youth, as well as our mental health, and also how HIV can come into our lives, that there's nothing actually about our queer and transness that is the issue, and that it is the world that surrounds us and the ways in which we are received by our communities that causes us to be in conflict around our mental health and our mental health needs. And so through this process, the youth were able to really begin to be a bit more playful and find the joy and the creativity and utility and nourishment that comes from our queer and trans identities. Next slide, please. Yeah, and so this year, similarly to last year, we really noted how at that time, the pandemic was in full force in 2020. And so we had to bring a very, very high level of attention and intention to how we would gather with one another. And that was the same for this year. But what was really lovely is that there was a little bit more of an opening up in terms of thinking about how do we meet some of the mental health needs that would show up in the group that might not have been possible in the previous year due to like really needing to create distance and safety within the group at that time. And so some of these looked like nature and facilitation. So there's a couple of images there, and you can see that for folks who have experienced Quadra Island, Saqualutan territory, it is such a beautiful place to be. And as queer and trans youth, to like show up in this environment and to be welcomed into the territory and to get to like do our learning outside and enjoy and feel the sun on our face as we're talking about some of these heavier content areas, and to get to walk the paths and along the beach as we're sitting with some of the harder pieces of ourselves and our lives was deeply nourishing. We also put a lot of effort into creating as much logistical ease for the youth and participants. It was really important that folks would have all of their needs met from the moment they arrived. Absolutely everything in this program, we're so fortunate to have received such financial support to be able to truly offer such a sweet opportunity where we have a gorgeous place to sleep at night. We have beautiful food, and I'm seeing the next point as being just getting to share food with one another. That at that time of the year, that was something that was available to us, and that we know through many of our cultural backgrounds, and especially as queer and trans youth, that being with one another and getting to have those side conversations and the more casual interactions over food can be some of the nourishing ways that we literally metabolize the content that we were exploring. And centering joy in the pilot project. I think especially during a time when we are all and continue to be in a process of survival, we know that the pandemic has impacted queer and trans youth again disproportionately. And as a community that is already experiencing high levels of isolation, that getting to spend weekly time carved out to just sit in the glory of our queer and trans experiences, rather than focusing on some of the harder elements that we're dealing with from the day to day, really resonated with the group as a place and a exciting place to come back to each week. Yeah, I also just wanted to add a couple more points. So for some of the larger outcomes that we were working on this year for the Do You Mind project, we know that as queer and trans youth that we need each other. This has been our survival practices throughout the HIV epidemic and continuing into the present. And so just having this carved out time to really be with one another, that's how we found the retreat practice as a really sort of concentrated and carefully designed and curated experience for youth, where we were able to establish a particular level of trust and safety as we were moving into some more harder topics to explore with one another. And that we've also seen now doing this in the second year, that some of the impacts of this program are sometimes hard to see immediately afterwards, especially when we've just gone through such a rigorous experience ourselves. It's hard to even make sense of what has happened, and that what we've actually seen in our program is the way in which the health literacy and mental health literacy have really shown up in the youth as they reintegrate in our program on the Mycelium team and at YouthCo in general in lots of different ways. And also, as Fazia mentioned before, getting to see the leadership of past year folks coming back and getting to facilitate and create community connections in that way as well. And then also the final point I just want to leave us with before I pass on to my colleague Eol is that we also had this wonderful reminder that came from the youth that yes, we have a lot of experts in our community for our mental health, and that sometimes it's important to also like look to search from within ourselves to be able to see what are the resources that we have to offer ourselves in our communities. And this is how the artists really got involved. So we had many queer and trans youth artist experts around integrating mental health and art come in and share their experiences and their work with us, which I think was just a really lovely way of honoring also our ancestors who have been doing that work throughout the HIV epidemic as well. So I'll leave it there and pass on to Eol to just share a couple more points around the participants and their experiences.
Hi everyone, my name again is Eol. I am a program coordinator for the Mycelium team, and I was in charge of overseeing and execute the Do You Mind retreat as well as the pilot project. And I would also like to transmit and echo the voices of our participants by sharing with you that they were very pleased with the Do You Mind initiative and thankful to us for the approach that we took of meeting them where they're at and supporting the mental health of the group throughout this entire process. Since Do You Mind, as we know, focuses on mental health initiatives, we curated the pilot project to really embody positive mental health practices so as to make the pilot project an enjoyable and fulfilling experience for participants. Having delivering this project, I am even more aware now of the importance of considering and integrating accessibility as well as pleasure activism when we're developing and implementing mental health initiatives. I can also say and share that it was very rewarding for me to witness participants voice the aspects from our queer and trans identities, stories, and legacies that nourish our whole personal and collective well-being and mental health. I also really enjoyed getting in contact with our community partners, local artists, and making that connection too, and that networking with the group of youth that we were working with. Finally, I also really appreciate the opportunity of voicing my experience with this project with you all today, and also to get to bring the voices of our participants here and what they thought overall about the project. And I'm very excited to learn more about the other Do You Mind initiatives.
Thank you so much, Emily and Eol, for sharing your experience in delivering Do You Mind in Vancouver, BC, and also sharing the voices of your participants there. And I would really like to appreciate the sentiment that Emily expressed while they were mentioning that our queer and trans identities are not the issues, but the challenges arises from how we navigate the systems that are put in place and how those puts in so much barriers, how we navigate our existence, and as well as how we access services. And honestly, that's kind of the overarching goal of Do You Mind, to really reinforce that sense of belonging, that sense of identity, and improve those protective factors, and really improve the overall well-being of our queer youth, queer and trans youth. So thank you so much for that. Next slide, please. Now we have another delivery partner, the Youth Project, who delivered Do You Mind in Halifax, Nova Scotia. And Youth Project is a nonprofit charitable organization dedicated to providing support and services to youth 25 and under around issues of sexual orientation and gender identity. Their mission is simple but bold: making Nova Scotia a healthier, happier, and safer lesbian, gay, bisexual, queer, questioning, transgender, genderqueer, intersex, and all of other youth 25 and under. Speaking on behalf of the Youth Project is Kirk Furlot, CBRC's Atlantic Manager. Please welcome Kirk Furlot, and Kirk, take it away.
Thank you so much, Fazia. So yes, unfortunately, none of the Youth Project staff could be here with us today, but I've been very heavily involved with the Youth Project since the very beginning. In fact, I went to one of their very first meetings the year after they started. So if we could move forward to the next slide. So like a lot of projects, you're probably gonna hear, there were some speed bumps along the way, but ultimately success was had all around. So originally the program was going to be held in person in August at the end of the Halifax Pride Festival, which had been delayed because of COVID. And then there were extenuating circumstances that prevented that. And then COVID was a constantly changing beast, so eventually it was held online. The participants, there were 6 local youth participants. Most of them were actually local youth leaders, people who had been involved with the Youth Project. Similar to Youth Code, they do have a youth board, so several of those people were involved. They also had local 2SLGBTQI leaders as guest presenters. A recurring theme that came up from the participants was experiences of workplace exploitation. You know, lots of youth are still getting, you know, they're entering the workforce, and they didn't necessarily know how to navigate that scenario and be successful, and not just in terms of capitalism, but like as a person. So that was picked as the theme for the community-based intervention that was going to be developed, and that built upon some of our key themes for the project, such as cultural identity, violence and discrimination related to exploitation, and healthy relationships with your coworkers. It also recognizes that social environment is a determinant of health, because, you know, it's easy to say like, oh, it's just work, but I think we all know you spend a lot of time at work and it really can damage your spirit and your soul. Should say, of course, my apologies, Youth Project is based in Jipuktuk, which is in Mi'kmaq, the ancestral and unceded territory of Mi'kmaq. All right, let's move forward to the next slide and let's see what the youth developed. It was a workshop on queering professionalism. So it was both a workshop and a discussion space focused on the experiences that they have in the workplace. It includes sessions on like how to set boundaries and how to avoid exploitation of your labor in order to protect and promote your own mental health. There were 11 participants. Ultimately, there was 20 registered, but there was a big storm that day and it was online. So parts of the province lost power and they couldn't like connect. Unfortunately, there was just scheduling, they couldn't remove the whole meeting. The workshop developed focused on building protective factors such as the healthy relationships, like how do you establish boundaries? How do you communicate with coworkers? Problem-solving abilities, right? Like identifying red flags, working with other people, that sort of thing. And also just your general social and emotional skills, like how do you cope with working in a toxic environment? Like how do you figure out what's next? So it was held online. I love the little graphic. The Youth Project is really great with graphics. If you could move forward one slide, please. So we have some great evaluation data from it. And again, it all ties back to our core funding mandate. Healthy relationship, 85.7 felt comfortable setting workplace boundaries. 100% are now feel comfortable that they can recognize red flags in the workplace, which is a key social and emotional skill. And I'm going to say as an older adult, I don't know that I always have those skills. 85.7 report increased knowledge of the experience that other young 2SLGBTQI plus or older 2SLGBTQI plus had in the workplace, and you know how that is unique. And then 66.2% increase in overall knowledge in terms of problem solving. But my favorite part of this whole thing is not in this slide. It is in the next slide. So this was a graphic recording that was done during their session by a local queer artist. So some of the things that came up that isn't necessarily like the hard data, but like things that like were communicated to me by the Youth Project staff and from what I've gleaned from our meetings. People don't know what they don't know. The workplace can be a scary experience for younger adults as they don't know how to navigate and set boundaries. They don't always know their rights, but you know, if it feels wrong, you should say something and like get clarification. It might be easy to just work is not mental health, but we know that social environments are a determinant of health. And I'm sure we've all had jobs that didn't exactly lift our spirits. But let's talk about how we can make it better for ourselves and for other workers. So it isn't just about advocating for yourself, but also advocating for the other your coworkers and your other youth. And it is easy for young workers to not only feel exploited, but to be actually exploited because they don't know all the boundaries. They don't necessarily know their rights. And youth have energy and passion, and this shows that they want to work but they also want to be valued where and when they work. So if you were ever doing a workshop like this, some recommendations. Have snacks. People love food. Honoraria, which proves the point that you are honoring the youth's time, right? It's not just show up, give us participate and go. We want to recognize that we value your input. This is not just us listening to you. This is us affecting change. Have an experienced facilitator. This is a big, complicated topic. You need someone who can help people navigate and find themes and group things. Use prompts and stories to help spur the conversation. It might be a little bit hard for some of the participants to sort of get up and running right away. So having some examples and then people can relate to that and build off it. Make sure that participants walk away with a few solid skills and mindsets that will guide them. Obviously, in one program, one session, you're not going to give everyone all of the skills that they need, but they should walk away with something solid that they can say, yes, I know how to do this now. And if you've got the money, get a graphic recorder because this thing is beautiful. That is it for me on behalf of the Youth Project. So I will pass things now back to Fazia.
Well, thank you so much, Kirk, for being here with us on behalf of Youth Project. And interestingly, I want to share that it was very fitting to be Kirk for Kirk to be doing this presentation because he was actually a youth at Youth Project in their second year of operation back in, Kirk didn't want me to mention that, but he does it because he doesn't want to reveal his age, but I will say it was back in the 90s. So I think, thank you, Kirk, so much for sharing about Youth Project's intervention this year. And also I'd like to share their Youth Project's Instagram link in the chat box because they have this wonderful visual uploaded on their Instagram page as well. So please feel free to take a look, zoom in. It's a wonderful visual guide that came out of their intervention this year. So thank you again, Kirk. Next slide, please. So now for our next partner, who's Max Ottawa in Ottawa, who's our very new delivery partner for this year. And Max Ottawa is a community-based organization that focuses on maximizing the health and wellness of gay, bisexual, two-spirit, queer, and other guys who are into guys, both cis and trans in the Ottawa region. Unfortunately, our representatives from Max Ottawa could not join us today, but I am here, so I'll be sharing more about their intervention and their program delivery experience from this year. Next slide, please. Thank you. So as I mentioned, Max was our fourth and the newest partner for this cycle. And so they onboarded the Do You Mind program and completed their initial partner training with CBRC in April last year, not 2022. There's a little mistake on the slide. So April, May 2021 last year. And with them getting an understanding of the program and how they want to deliver the program, they decided that they will incorporate a hybrid model for program delivery. And they also integrated information session before they started the curriculum delivery. Essentially, because they were the first time delivering this program, their information session actually led to a lot of participant interest. And there were a lot of participants that really wanted to be a part of this program in Ottawa. They also included 8 external facilitators who joined Max Ottawa in terms of delivering different curriculum modules, different health promotion modules, and this also enhanced overall engagement from participants. They held a 4-day programming with 15 recruits at their office location, and as well as some sessions over online delivery. Max Ottawa wanted me to share that during the curriculum delivery, there were some standout sessions that participants really felt connected to it and enjoyed, and was happy to see that some of those topics were included in the curriculum. So some of the standout session includes a session on queerness and spirituality and we called it Queertuality. So essentially this session explored queerness and spirituality, and participants resonated with content that expanded beyond the definition of spirituality to include multiple practices of self and community care, as well as how 2SLGBTQ plus youth develop or maintain a connection with religious or spiritual groups, and why some of them reject them as well. Another interesting thing that the participants mentioned was that the material for the program delivery was new, and there were a lot of interactive discussions too, which also went well with the participants. And Max Ottawa also held some open sessions, which was built within the Do You Mind curriculum, and where they had conversations around queer intergenerational trauma. And those open sessions essentially really encouraged some resource sharing among participants and really helped build that stronger social connections. Following the end of curriculum delivery, participants maintained social connection via WhatsApp and Discord. And again, with Max Ottawa being our new partner, I was kind of hands-on in terms of providing them as much support as they need. And I would like to say that the Discord proved really successful with this group of participants, and they were able to complete a lot of pilot planning over the Discord channel when they couldn't be in person because of the surge of variants when they were last year. Also, one of the things that Max Ottawa highlighted was that the sessions help participants to not only explore mental health topics, but also allowed them to share those resources, for example, during the open sessions, and increase their mental health literacy as they found the material to be new and engaging, and also improve their protective factors by building those social connections, not feeling alone. Meeting with folks, meeting with external facilitators and learning from their experiences, and really having that reinforcement in their identities. Next slide, please. So for their intervention planning, the participants really took from the experience that they had during curriculum delivery. They had conversations around queer experiences of dating, of loss, of childhood, and etc. And during that, they realized that there are only few spaces for queer people to gather socially that aren't gathered around consumption. So they really felt that this was a gap, and they wanted to address that gap. So the intervention for the pilot intervention development, Max Ottawa came with the title of Queer Space, and I'll share a bit more about that. They planned that this would be a 4-week interactive journaling and art workshop. Again, connecting people through those creative channels, allowing them to process things while they have that experiential projects that they're being involved in. They wanted to have this queer space as a social space to unpack one's queer identities for 2022, and have that space be conducive to having conversations that queer people often want to have, but don't commonly feel they have the permission to do so. And also, this space would have facilitators that would lead guided discussions and help participants process what comes up during while they're participating, and build a mental health toolkit. Next slide, please. So again, their intervention had like 4 interactive sessions that focused on different topics. For example, they had session called Improv for Self-Confidence that helped participants deal with performance anxieties and have conversations around that. They had another session called Processing Through Painting, Art for Grief and Loss. Very interesting sessions that they're planned for this. And the other session is The Moment I Knew, Collaging Queer Childhood. And the last but not least is the New Year, New Queer, Journaling for Self-Care. So this is where they would compile all of the resources and the strategies that they came up to deal with their emotional well-being during all of those 4 sessions. And essentially, those 4 sessions really tied well together with strengthening the participants' sense of community connection, process their own queer identity in a safe space, and which really increases their protective factors that the funding and the overarching goal of Do You Mind is, and also positively impact their overall emotional health. And one of the quotes that I would like to share that one of the participants shared was that they said they did not feel alone in their journeys while sharing their experiences. And I think that was really powerful. And I'm so glad the participant was comfortable for us to share their quotation with you all. Again, please feel free to share any questions you have about these interventions as we're talking through them in the chat box. And at the end of the session, we'll come back to the questions and answer them for you. Alrighty, so next slide, please. Now we have our last panelist and our last delivery partner, Emhc. And Emhc is a grassroots health organization run by and for queer and trans community members with the mission to address the specific health determinants and needs of queer and trans community members through community education, support, and capacity building, professional development, and community-based research and advisory. With us today, we have QC Gu, who uses he, they pronouns and is the Emhc Community Health Leadership Programs Coordinator. Please join me in welcoming QC.
Thanks, Fauzia. And before I begin, I just want to say what a pleasure it was to work with you and the rest of the CBRC team in implementing Do You Mind this year. And also, what a pleasure it's been in getting to know all the folks across the country who have been part of this project. Next slide, please. So hi, everyone. My name is QC Gu, and I'm joining from Treaty 6 territory. I work at the Edmonton Men's Health Collective, which will very soon be renamed the Queer and Trans Health Collective, probably in the next month or so. So for Do You Mind this year, we had 12 participants go through curriculum delivery, which because of COVID, happened virtually over 3 weekends. And for those weekends, we had a team of 11 different facilitators, 12 including me. And this team was incredibly diverse and included university professors, artists, community activists, and staff from other nonprofits. And we found that having this diverse group of folks to be really helpful with participant engagement. Participants were more or less getting a different facilitator for every module, and they were very excited by that. In terms of a participant engagement outside of session times, the group had their own Facebook group to chat and to engage with each other. Getting back to the curriculum, this year we decided that we really wanted to focus on the structural determinants of mental health, especially in relation to structures of oppression. And what this looked like, just as a few examples, is that, for instance, the original module entitled Self-Esteem and Body Image was changed to Self-Esteem and Body Image, Explorations in Gender, Race, and Size. So while the original module really focused on fat phobia, we either inserted or deepened additional elements about how gender and race also impact self-esteem and body image. As another example, the original module entitled Queertuality or Queer Spirituality was changed to Settler Colonialism and Queertuality. And the intention behind this change was to explore a little on how spiritual abuse, as it has been enacted on queer and gender diverse peoples, can be tied to the larger system of colonization, especially when thinking about residential schools. As for the open sessions, we did up one entitled Power, Inclusion, and Intersectionality in Community Work. And in that module, we brought in speakers from the African Canadian Civic Engagement Council, from the Edmonton Mennonite Center for Newcomers, which runs a queer newcomer program, and from a QT BIPOC community art collective called The Hue. And we also had an open session entitled Wakotowin, Indigenous Governance and Decision-Making, which was designed to be a decolonial introduction to decision-making processes as the group began their project ideation process in deciding on a community intervention. So at the end of curriculum delivery, we disseminated the evaluation survey, and these are just a few of the highlights. 83% of participants reported an increase in the knowledge that we covered, and 83% reported an increase in confidence to apply their skills in responding to issues of mental health in their community. Next slide, please. Now, moving on to the intervention, what participants came up with this year was called the Alberta 2SLGBTQ+ Connections Program. So this pilot project was targeted towards youth and young adults aged 18 to 29 who have rural backgrounds. And by rural backgrounds, we mean folks who have either lived or continue to live outside of major urban centers in Alberta. So the intervention had two components. For the first component, we held a workshop series that included both mental health and creative expression workshops made by and for rural queer folks. For the second component, we collected stories and graphics from rural queer folks to compile into a zine. And the goals of this intervention were to, one, increase participants' mental health literacy, two, to increase their ability to understand and express their identities and experiences, and three, to improve their social connections. So we held the workshop series online over a weekend in January, and the workshops were bookended by two mental health workshops, and these were called Queer Wellness in Rural Spaces, parts 1 and 2. And in between, we had a workshop on zine making and also a workshop on personal writing. After the workshops ended, we gave participants 2 weeks to submit a creation for the zine. And we also put out a general call out on social media to collect stories, poems, and graphics from rural folks who weren't able to attend the workshop. And at the end of the workshop series, the participants filled out a survey, and here are some of the highlights. So 100% of respondents reported an increase in knowledge about resources available to rural 2SLGBTQ+ folks. 71.5% of respondents agreed or strongly agreed that after attending the workshop series, they felt more confident in their ability to use writing or drawing as a means of self-expression. 85.7% of respondents indicated they developed new social connections, and the same amount agreed or strongly agreed that participating in the program increased their overall sense of well-being. Next slide, please. And lastly, I just want to share some graphics from the zine, which is still being worked on by our graphic designers. We received 12 submissions in total. The image on the left is one of the graphic submissions, and the image on the right is a concept image we received from the graphic designers in terms of how they were approaching the visual identity of the zine. And the zine should be finished by the end of this month, and we're really looking forward to sharing it with everyone. And that's all I have for today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, QC, for sharing about Edmonton's intervention and how the program went and some of the adaptations you were able to make for the Do You Mind curriculum. So really appreciate that. And for myself, I'm really looking forward to the zine that will be available at the end of this month. And I'm very excited to get my hands on it. Alrighty, so thank you again. And now we will pass it on to Ricky, our CBRC's evaluation and reporting lead, who will be sharing a bit more evaluation data about all of the pilot interventions that our partners shared with us. So Ricky, please take it away.
Thanks, Fazia. Next slide, please. All right, so some of these findings might have already been touched on, but to put some things into perspective, you got to hear about our partner sites pilot intervention projects that their Do You Mind participants facilitated. When we looked at the evaluation data from those projects, we saw that across projects, there was 70% of respondents who reported increased knowledge about the topics covered in the different pilot intervention projects. Looking at the projects more specifically, as QC mentioned, in the Emhc pilot intervention project in Alberta, 85.7% of respondents reported new social connections with other participants. In YouthCo's pilot intervention project in BC, 85.7% of respondents reported activation, which was defined as through their engagement with the mental health resource that was developed, they we're encouraged to think about shared and or diverse experiences within queer and trans communities. And in Nova Scotia, the Youth Project's Pilot Intervention Project, all respondents to that evaluation survey reported increased skills, and those were specifically skills related to their ability to advocate for work-life balance, as Kirk mentioned. So we continue to see some positive outcomes from the pilot intervention projects as well. And I'll hand it back to Fazia to go over some few more insights before we open it up to Q&A.
Thank you so much, Ricky. And again, sharing this evaluation highlights with everybody today is essentially just to showcase that, yes, programs like this really do resonate positively with the participants, and it does have some, it has the intended impact at the end of the day. So I really appreciate Ricky for sharing these with us today. And moving on, I'll be sharing some insights. So next slide, please. All right, so again, these are some of the insights that we wanted to compile and share with you all based on our experience of delivering Do You Mind for the last 2 years. And some of the key ones are essentially how we were very intentional about consultations before we started cycle 2 to really integrate all the recommendations and all the suggestions that we got from our partners and from our participants from last year, and really making sure that these will improve cycle 2 when we deliver it. And applying this learnings from cycle 1 really helped us optimize the program adaptation, and also involving the local leaders when we were revamping our mental health curriculum help us include some of those new materials and really have a discussion with our partner sites to see that how can you improve last year's curriculum to make it more relevant to the youth and the cycle of Do You Mind. So that was one of the key things, to do consultations and be intentional of how we want to integrate the lessons we learned. So that was a really key thing for us, to making sure that the cycle, we made it as obstacle-free as possible for our delivery partners. And also utilizing asset-based approach, increased participant engagement. So what I mean by that is that across all our delivery partner side, we wanted to make sure that the participants were offered the opportunities to really utilize their strength that they brought when they joined the program during intervention planning, and build, and while utilizing their already available strengths, they were also able to build on their existing capacities, thereby having them network with our community leaders, having them network with our external facilitators. So that was also one of the key highlights for utilizing asset-based approach for Do You Mind program delivery. And also we made sure that the bias forest approach is extended throughout the Do You Mind program delivery. And by that, I mean opportunities for the past program participants to be involved and include their learnings to facilitate another successful run of Do You Mind. Then moving on, as Kirk mentioned during his presentation, was offering incentives to both participants and guest facilitators to really show that we really appreciate their time that they're putting in for this program, and as well as helping create some really meaningful community programs, community pilot interventions. And also when talking with participants during focus groups and during informal check-ins, this incentive really resonated well with most of the participants. And also making sure that partner sites, for this time around, making sure that partner sites had the option to provide program certificates to participants to recognize their work as paraprofessional experience within this Do You Mind leadership programming. So we did have some certificate templates, and again, if participants wanted, they could have also utilized these experience into their resumes to really highlight the work that they have done to create this pilot interventions in their local regions. And again, as I mentioned before, revising the Do You Mind program facilitator guide. So essentially, For this cycle, we really created a program guide, so which provides an in-depth overview of Do You Mind program structure, the activities, and acts as an instructional resource guide for delivery partner. So it details A to Z about how to go about delivering Do You Mind, what are some of the strategies to implement, some of the recruitment strategies, some of the staffing strategies, some of the coordination strategies, and some of how to go about evaluation. Even though CBRC mostly overtakes all the evaluation needs of the program, but again, this is some of the strategies that they may apply to other programs that they have. So, and we already have that available, and this might work as a great resource for folks, for other organizations who might be interested in taking on Do You Mind and delivering it at their organization. Also, as Ricky had mentioned earlier during the presentation, that we had revised the evaluation strategy, and this really helped us complete analysis within a better time frame while reducing the burden on participants and also improving the quality of data for specific outcomes. So really, looking at last year's evaluation strategies, we took what the participants suggested and really made sure we implemented those changes this time around. And also, one of the insights that I want to share with folks is that not being afraid to go back to the funders and request that some changes that we may need to do to make sure that we have a successful program delivery. So we did make some amendments to especially around evaluation and around some budget. We did those to make sure that we are able to accommodate a fourth new partner and also make sure that participants are not feeling overwhelmed by taking part in this leadership program. And last but not the least, again, being mindful of the capacity of both delivery partners and participants. So that kind of was showcased into the curriculum that we created, making sure that it is adaptable for both online and in-person delivery and still has that engaging qualities that could translate well over Zoom sessions, and providing the partners with any supports that they need during program delivery, because pandemic is challenging and it has been challenging, but making sure that we do have a contingency plan that if things doesn't go according to the initial plan, we can have that 2 to 3 weeks time to be able to adjust the program and get it back on track. So yeah, those were some of the insights that I wanted to share with you. And please feel free to post any questions that you have about this, or if you want us to share more about any of those topics that was shared today, that would be great. And we will get to those questions in the next part of the presentation. For now, next slide, please. I want to share some of the contact information. So for CBRC, there's the contact information, our email, doyoumind@cbrc.net. You can email any questions about the program, or if you want to learn more and in depth about some of this intervention, you can also reach out to our site partners. We have YouthCo, we have Emhc, we have Youth Project, and we have Max Ottawa. So I'll leave the slide on for a little bit in case folks wants to know the email addresses. Please feel free to do so. And again, as I mentioned, on our Do You Mind on our CBRC website, on the Do You Mind page, we have the information and we have linked all of our partners. So you're also able to access all of their websites through the CBRC page. All right, just gonna leave it for 30 more seconds before we move on to the Q&A period. And we have about 20 minutes remaining for the session, so we will utilize the rest of the time to hear from our partners. Alrighty, so next slide, please. Now to kick off our Q&A period, where we'll hear from all of our panelists today, I want to start with the question that we got in the chat box. It is directed to Youth Co. So the question is, so Emily and Eel, feel free to take this one. The question is, do you have more capacity to partner with other organizations, perhaps an aid service organization on Vancouver Island that lost its funding for its youth education program?
Yeah, thank you for that question and for reaching out. That would definitely be a question I would need to take back to the executive director of our organization for more funding support. But in terms of collaboration, the Mycelium team is always open to collaborating with other partners and have collaborated with some folks on the island as well. So are happy to reach out. So please email me and we'll get in touch and follow up.
Thank you, Emily. If Eel doesn't have anything to add on, should I move on to the next question? Perfect. Okay. So again, this question is for all our partners. The question is, what would you say was the difference between cycle 1 and cycle 2 delivery of Do You Mind program?
If no one else wants to go first, I can. We got a little more accustomed to living in a pandemic. So for those of you who don't know, cycle 1, we did it essentially in the summer of 2020. I was just thinking 2 years ago, some of us were in Edmonton, figuring out what Do You Mind really was going to be. And then I personally came back, and then the next day, my province went into a lockdown. And so rough start to the program. That's the first thing that comes to mind. I'm sure other people have more insightful thoughts, but that was the fact that we adjusted as best we could to the pandemic, even though the adjustment was every few weeks.
Yeah, I think for us, the major difference was just getting to introduce the program into community in the previous year, made folks really curious around getting involved for this upcoming year. So we definitely had many more folks interested in participating. And as I mentioned before, just also having that support of folks from the past years coming back and getting to be more involved, I think helped the overall project run more smoothly, but also feel much more organic and community-based in this past year as well.
For the Edmonton site, I wasn't around for last year, but I do know one of the major differences for this year was that, so last year we did maybe one module every week, so 1.5 hour to 2 hour session per week for curriculum delivery, and we had lots of feedback saying that the curriculum took too long. So what we did this year was we condensed delivery to over 3 weekends. So what I think worked pretty well. It may have been a little too intense. So if we were to do this in the future, maybe we will kind of spread it into 4 weekends. But yeah, the 3 weekends worked well, I think.
Thank you so much, folks, for sharing that. And again, just to share from CBRC's perspective, last year, the pandemic was kind of a surprise. I think everybody came to Edmonton for their planning sessions, and it was very nice to meet everybody in person. I wasn't there at that time, so it's still unfortunate for me that I haven't met many of our partners in person yet. But this time around, the pandemic wasn't a surprise, so we were able to leverage some of our learnings and some of the adjustment and the adaptations we made for online delivery to really implement those again this year and see that they were successful. So yeah, with the pandemic not being a surprise, it was maybe a tad bit easier. Again, the pandemic is still challenging, but may have been a little bit easier to be able to deliver the program online, adapted for Zoom or other online platforms. All right, so we have another question. So this question is essentially about what were some of the accessibility accommodations made at each side? So whoever wants to take that, please feel free.
I think for the Edmonton site, I mean, obviously we delivered everything. Everything was online this year. So making sure we had closed captioning was important to the programming. But also in terms of disability accommodations, we worked with a Inclusion Alberta, which is for like specific participants who needed more support within the program. So we partner with Inclusion Alberta and a couple of different sites across Alberta to kind of just to go through any kind of specific supports any given participant may have needed.
Yeah, and for our site, as I mentioned before, I think the careful attention to logistical ease. So really utilizing the resources to bring ease around travel so that everyone was able to like be picked up and dropped off at their homes safely. Yeah, everything in terms of like where we were going to be staying and meals, all those pieces were completely yeah, we worked with individuals on ensuring that their needs were met. And then of course, gathering in person, navigating conflicting needs that might come up in a group around yeah, wearing masks in a shared space and being able to separate ourselves with enough comfort for everyone to feel comfortable in the space and having access to like open doors and things like that in order to decrease the harm of COVID. But I'll also pass it off to Yul to speak a little bit more around, there's a lot of intention that was brought into the pilot intervention piece around accessibility as well.
Thank you. So during the pilot project, we also had weekly meetings for a couple of weeks. And one of our first ones was completely around accessibility, thinking in terms of our art installation of the final product. We really prioritized accessibility. So we had a lot of font options, right? But then again, also us, the participants, doing their own research too about which fonts would be more accessible, right, for many of us. Also deciding to do captioning in all of our art installation and having the participants support that as well. The colors, the color scheme, really, we paid a lot of attention into our final product we're creating for the art installation to the art be accessible to everyone, but also the event. And as we know now, because of COVID, we had to move it online. But again, that's another accommodation that needed to happen and to keep all of us safe.
On behalf of the Youth Project, so one of the things I think that happened very well was, originally it was planned to be in person. So one of the accommodations they offered was transportation help, right? They recognized that not everyone, has a car or has a bus pass. So when it was planned to be in person, that was one of the questions, like, do you need help getting here, essentially? So there was the possibility of like bus tickets or taxi jets, depending on where they were. Obviously, it was in Halifax, so we're like, we're not going to drive you 4 hours for like an evening of programming, but it's an option to get here. And we also, very thankfully, at the very beginning, when we posted the registration form, one of the things we asked, of course, we want to clarify any accessibility need for participants. We also broke that down for the in-person and online, which worked out really well because we ended up doing a lot online.
These are wonderful. Thank you all for sharing those. And I think those bus passes, those food coupons, and like making sure the color schemes, it's accessible, and asking participants what are their needs. That is really amazing. And thank you all for considering that while delivering the program. Our next question is, it's for all our panelists. What was your role in supporting your participants in developing this pilot interventions? How did you balance being too hands-on and letting your participants lead the intervention?
Like I can go. For us at YouthCo, I think it was very important to, from the beginning, set the expectations that we had for participants, so they knew starting the pilot project how much capacity they need to have, how much work they'd have to put in, and when that project required more, then we engaged with other community partners, for example, a graphic designer, to elevate the design that we had all created and that all the participants had worked to, but that we need a little bit more support in that sense. to deliver our art installation at a level that would be even more enjoyable for other youth to engage with it.
I also just want to add that Yul did an incredible job also of meeting the needs of the group in such a way that, like, we did have these weekly meetings, but also Yul also met with folks a lot outside of that space in order for folks that were not able to like show up necessarily consistently to be able to still offer their insights. I think that the project really you can just see in the final product that there's like the individual and personal stories and creativity that was really borne out, and that by like centering that in the work, then everything else kind of came, I think, with more ease and joy.
Yeah, Edmonton site, the group was just really coming gung-ho, and we just took the reins and creating the project. I think my only role was really at the beginning to kind of communicate clearly what the funders' expectations are, and that the project has to be within those parameters. So that was for ideation. In terms of the actual planning, it's communicating clearly every week what people were able to do or not do, and so I would just do what people were not able to do, but always giving the space for participants to do what they did want to do. So for instance, some of the marketing that we made for the intervention were created by the group themselves, and also group members wanted to try their skills at facilitating workshops. So for the actual intervention itself, at least half of our facilitators were from the participant group. So I guess the balance is about being available to help, but just letting them take the lead. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Kirk, is there anything else you want to add to this?
Well, I mean, I was not super involved in this part of the project. This was the youth project, but I do think of I was much more involved in the previous year. And I think one of the best things that was, online, mixed feelings personally, but like we did use tools like Google Docs where people could collaboratively create things. And so, we would just sort of say like, okay, so like, here's like, let's create ideas for this. And you could brainstorm, people could edit together, they could write together. In some ways better than you could in person, because you're actually like in the same document. So it's not like waiting for this person to edit it and pass it physically over to you. My impression, again, wasn't there, is that it was more like, okay, the youth drove the work, and then the staff just sort of like, tweaked it a little bit, like as QC said, making sure like, okay, here's why we need to do certain things a certain way, both for youth project policies and for our funder. And the youth also generated the ideas and the topics that were discussed in the workshop, because that's what they wanted. So youth first.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you again for sharing your insights about this question. I really appreciate it. Again, it's a fine balance to making sure the youth feels in control and they're in charge of their pilot intervention. So absolutely appreciate all the work all you folks have done in supporting the youth and supporting the project. And I think that was all the time we had Q&A. So once again, I would like to thank all of our panelists, all of our wonderful delivery partners, and Ricky as well for sharing their insights with us today. And all of us, we all live and work in our community, and organizations are working to improve the health and mental health needs of 2SLGBTQ plus youth. And we can never have enough discussion about this. So again, thank you so much for spending time with us. And shout out to our CBRC's communication team for putting this event together and making sure it was seamless for all of us to present our work with you all. And please make sure you follow us on at cbrc.net. We are available on all social media platforms, and so are our partners. Again, all of the information will be available on CBRC website. And last but not the least, Do You Mind is now a fully realized program. So if folks are interested in delivering this program in the future, please feel free to reach out to myself at doyoumind.cbrc.net, or if you want to learn more from our partner site, please reach out to them as well. And yeah, take care, and thank you all again. Bye-bye.